1901, Kansas. A teacher named Edna Morse received new curriculum guidelines. She read what had been removed. She understood what the removal meant. She wrote to her superintendent. She said she'd continue teaching the original curriculum. She was told to stop. She refused. They fired her in December. This happened across the country that year. Kansas, Ohio, Indiana, same year, same instructions, same removals. What were they told to stop teaching? Not radical theory, not dangerous ideology. Economic history taught for 3 decades. How money is created, who controls currency, who benefits when policy changes, who bears cost, not opinions, the curriculum. In 1901 they began to disappear. The timing was not accidental. 1901 was the year William McKinley was assassinated. Theodore Roosevelt took presidency. 1901 was the year United States Steel Incorporated, largest corporation in world history, capitalized at $1.4 billion, exceeded entire federal government annual revenue. Consolidation of American industrial and financial power reached completion. The question of what school children should understand about how that happened became for the first time a question the men who accomplished it had means to answer. To understand 1901, go back to 1879. Henry George published Progress and Poverty, sold 3 million copies in a decade. 1 copy for every 20 American adults. Second best-selling book behind only the Bible. It was taught in schools, debated in churches, the lens through which a generation understood economic life. George's argument. Land ownership concentration was the mechanism by which wealth extracted from labor accumulated in hands of those who produce nothing. He proposed a single tax on land value, not on labor, not on production, on land value itself. Land increased in value, not because of what the landowner did, but because of community growing around it. Andrew Carnegie called it one of the most important books ever written, before he changed his mind publicly. This is the curriculum Edna Morse was using in 1901, and this is why the letter she wrote is worth reading. She had received new curriculum frameworks. Frameworks arrived through state boards, boards receiving support from foundations that hadn't existed a decade earlier. Framing, modernization, efficiency, industrial economy. The framework specified what should no longer be included. Economic history of monetary creation was gone. Deflationary policy, 1870s, 1880s, that transferred wealth from debtors to creditors, gone. Henry George's land value analysis, gone. Greenback movement that said government, not banks, should control currency, had elected governors and senators across 14 states, reclassified as discredited fringe. Railroad monopoly pricing, reduced to footnote. National Banking Act and rural credit, not taught. Chain connecting monetary decisions to farm foreclosures, replaced with narrative about individual thrift. What replaced it was not wrong, simply incomplete in ways that benefited specific people. The new curriculum taught markets allocated resources efficiently, that wages reflected productive value of labor. Did not teach who decided what productive value meant, who set the conditions, what the record showed about wages when workers had no alternative. It taught the conclusion, removed the evidence that led prior generations to question it. Edna Morse understood this. In her letter she writes, she'd been teaching students to read economic history like any history, with primary sources, with cause and effect, with understanding someone always benefits from policy. Identifying who benefits is the beginning of understanding why the decision was made. She did not believe it was her function to protect students from conclusions that made powerful people uncomfortable. Her function was to teach them how to reach conclusions. The letter was written in October. She was dismissed in December. In 1902, John D. Rockefeller established the General Education Board, $1 million initial, eventually $53 million over 2 decades. Stated mission, promote education without distinction. Actual function documented in published reports, coordinate and standardize American schooling along lines founders considered appropriate for industrial economy. Frederick Gates wrote in 1906, the object was to produce in the child perfect knowledge of what he ought to do and will to do it. Not the function Edna Morse believed schools served. In 1905, Andrew Carnegie established the Carnegie Foundation for Advancement of Teaching, $10 million. First project, pension system for teachers, remembered as generosity. The condition: to qualify, a college had to adopt specific curriculum standards the foundation considered acceptable. Curriculum control dressed as retirement security. Teachers who taught old economic history were aging out. Teachers replacing them would be trained in institutions that accepted Carnegie's terms to secure Carnegie's money. This was not conspiracy. No secret meetings, no coded communications. It was convergent interest. The men who funded standardization of American education were the same men whose accumulated wealth the old curriculum explained, documented, and questioned. They did not need to coordinate. They needed only to fund. Osage County, winter 1901. Edna Morse knew her students. Watched them grow up where deflationary policy foreclosed parents' land, transferred to Eastern creditors at fractions of value. She understood from economic history. She taught why that happened. Who designed the conditions? If students never learned that history, they'd have no framework for recognizing it again. They'd have only the story markets were natural. Outcomes deserved. Poverty from individual failure, not structural decisions by people with names and specific financial interests. That is what she refused to stop saying. Documented pattern with named beneficiaries. Traceable through testimony and filings. She was teaching the evidentiary standard she applied to everything else. Her students remembered her. 3 wrote letters later in life. 2 located in Kansas County collections. They describe a woman who treated economic questions like geological questions or biological questions as things that had answers. Answers you could find if you knew where to look. One writes she was the only teacher who made him feel the world could be understood, not simplified, understood. After she left, the new teacher was perfectly kind and perfectly useless. Students who sat in her classroom in 1901 were born around 1888. They'd be in their 20s during Panic of 1907, when J.P. Morgan performed function of central bank. In their 30s, when Federal Reserve Act passed in 1913. The monetary debate their teacher had been forbidden to teach. Whether they recognized what they were seeing depended on whether Edna Morse had gotten to them before December 1901. The General Education Board published The Country School of Tomorrow in 1913. Frederick Gates writes, the aim of education is not to create independent thinkers, but to produce useful citizens who perform tasks society assigns without friction. The goal: a population literate enough to follow instructions, not literate enough to question their origins. The old curriculum was incompatible because it taught origins. It taught instructions, had authors with interests, and the interests could be named. How many Edna Morses were there? How many teachers in 1901, 1902, 1903 received frameworks and understood the removal? Kansas Historical Society has 1.4 million documents. Edna Morse's letter became searchable in 2019. Before that, 70 years in a folder. If one Edna Morse in Kansas, there are 50 more in Ohio, Indiana, Nebraska, Iowa. Teachers who saw the change, understood it, wrote it down. Their letters sit in archives, waiting. Economic history removed in 1901 did not disappear entirely. Survived in letters of teachers who refused frameworks, in memories of students taught to ask who benefits, in documented record of what happened to American economy. Record that makes more sense when you know what curriculum contained. Archive is open. Documents are there. Somewhere in a folder nobody's checked since 1948, a teacher is still trying to finish the lesson she was told to stop giving. Edna Morse did not lose because she was wrong. She lost because what she was right about was inconvenient to people who had acquired institutional capacity to determine what American children would be taught. That capacity has not diminished. What has diminished is our memory of what was taken. They removed one question from American education in 1901. Who benefits? Someone always benefits from every policy. Every law, every economic decision, identifying who benefits is understanding why the decision was made. That is what Edna Morse taught. That is what they told her to stop teaching. That is what was removed from your education. Ask it about everything they teach you now.